Carl is trying to be the nice guy and asking me to be the mean guy and have you guys sit down. So we're reversing roles right now. This is role reversal. So if you all take your seats. Awesome. You guys are great. Whose phone is that?
I'll get it.
Who is that? What's mine?
Yeah, if you just silence your phones, that is so good. All right. All right. Well, you seem like in a jolly mood today.
Merry Christmas.
Some of you look like you're in a jolly place back here. Yes, you. All right. I'm gonna have my friend David come, and the relationship with David and Nancy is now going on a long time.
Too long.
30-something years. I'm gonna be nice. I'm not gonna say anything about the iron lung or anything. Nor, where'd you get these notes?
You told me to do them because you do them so faithfully. I needed to be in that, flow.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't want to talk to you. No, David and Nancy are incredibly friends, and I think what I really love about it is the depth of our relationship. We go back a long ways. We went through a lot of things, and he's been a great friend. Their family's been a great friend to me this entire time. And now that he's pastor emeritus, he has a little more freedom to travel and go out. And so I want to have him as much as possible because he's a great communicator, great Bible teacher. And in fact, sometime after the first year, we'll have him come for an all-day Saturday, and just on how to study the Bible, how to handle the Bible, understand it. And he's brilliant at it. So, and they're friends, Bill and Kathy. They're in-laws, and they stay together. I don't know what's up with that, but they're great people, and they've been visiting us as well. So, anyway, I want to bless my friend. I love him. Lord, just do what you do all the time, in and through David. Speak clearly, bring comfort, bring strength, bring your word. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. You didn't say anything mean. Wow. Not in the mood. Okay. That's a first in our relationship. That's awesome. Don, that was funny with the phone thing. That was pretty funny. My eldest daughter, Lindy, she lived in New York City and worked for the Weinstein Company. And one day they were having a meeting and a phone went off, and Harvey Weinstein looked at my daughter and just berated her and cursed her and humiliated her in front of this whole group of people. And then his assistant very shyly said, Harvey, that's your phone.
Yeah.
So was I surprised? No, I was not surprised. My favorite phone story, though, occurred, I don't know if you remember this, Carl, we had a National Vineyard Pastors Conference in San Antonio. And it was in some kind of auditorium, and there were a couple of thousand of us there. And our friend Lance Pitluck was up speaking. And he's starting to speak, and a phone goes off. And he goes, oh, I can't believe it. How, somebody's phone went off. And then somebody said it was in his briefcase on the front row. It was his phone. So everybody had a good laugh. And meanwhile, I pull out my phone. I'm going to dial it again. I'm going to keep ringing that phone until he has to go down off the platform and turn that phone off. So every like 10 seconds, it would go off. And it was me. Oh man. How mean is that? Oh, God. I love Christmas. I don't know how you feel about it. I think that Christmas can wear on you. There's a lot of. I read an interesting thing a few weeks ago that said that, that Christmas has been so stretched out, so commercialized, kind of beginning in October, that it's almost an irritant to people. And it's not that part that I love about Christmas. I've been a pastor for a long time, and so for 30 plus years I've made it a habit of whatever situation that I was in, leading a church, that I would spend the month of December talking about the coming of Christ, because I think it's so essential and important for us to understand. Nancy and I, we have 4 little grandchildren, a girl who's the princess, and then 3 little boys. And we have given them, like these little toy nativity sets. I don't know if you've seen them, but Ren, who's the oldest of them, we gave her a Fisher-Price nativity set. Kind of all the figurines are like Weeble Wobbles, but they don't fall down, And the hysterical thing about this nativity set by Fisher-Price is that among the collection of animals, including a camel and a cow and a donkey and a sheep, is a pig. There's a pig in the nativity set. Like, I just couldn't hold myself back. I had to write Fisher-Price. I said, who is the moron in charge of your religious toy division that imagines that in Bethlehem, the city of David, the hotbed of kind of messianic expectation in first century Israel, that some good Jew has a pig in their manger? Like which of you morons believe that? Like, I just want to know. They removed the pig from the Fisher-Price nativity set. I don't know if it's my letter or not, but... So Leo, who's 3, he's our grandson. He lives in Vancouver, British Columbia. Our son lives there with his wife, and they're 2 boys. But Leo's 3, and he has his little nativity set, and his mom texted us and said, we got his little nativity. He was playing with it, and Leo is obsessed with trucks. I've never seen a child more interested in particularly construction equipment and trucks. Like if a backhoe, a dump truck, he could sit and watch a construction site all day. He's just absolutely fascinated. So he got his nativity set out, and then he took his favorite construction truck, a cherry picker, and he parked it next to the baby Jesus in the manger. Like, it just made every sense to him that the baby Jesus would want to be close to a construction truck. And that's kind of what I want to do this morning. I want us to park the thing we're most interested in into the nativity scene. I want us to hear what is the surprising, I think, and really central message that comes from heaven with regard to Jesus' birth, and that's do not be afraid. It's surprising to me that, in the gospel accounts, obviously Matthew, Luke, those 2 primary sources that we have for understanding what we understand about Jesus' birth, that 4 times in kind of encounters, angelic encounters with the participants in the story, this message is voiced, do not be afraid. First to Zechariah in regard to the birth of John the Baptist, then to Mary, then to Joseph, and finally the shepherds on the hillsides in Bethlehem. So this message, do not be afraid. If I just think about it, like if I just kind of boil it down from a big perspective, like Old Testament perspective, like, wow, the promised one, the Messiah, long hoped for, long prayed for, desperately sought, the fervency in the first century around the possibility that the Messiah could come. Like when that announcement, when that redemptive ball gets rolling, like I would think maybe the angels would be saying, get excited. Yeah, come on. Like, get ready to party. Like, finally, it's happening. But that's not the message. The message is do not be afraid. Now, I know some say, well, it's angels, right? And in contrary to, Hallmark mythologizing, angels were apparently pretty frightening creatures to encounter up close. And so maybe, it's just, hey, settle down a minute because I have something to tell you, but that's not really what's going on in the gospel accounts. It's not a momentary, hold your emotions in check. It's a life direction that's being voiced. That something's happening in this incredible initiation of the redemptive purpose of God in the world for their lives, through their lives for others, that's happening, that is accompanied by this overarching call to reject fear. To not be afraid. Somehow, for this redemptive purpose of God, which is for them and for the whole world, for us, to go forward, that fear is in the way. And has to be rejected. Has to be overcome. Has to be kind of stepped over in our life. That's the background. Along with this reality that I think we miss. The people in the gospel accounts of the Christmas story, they were doing what everybody was doing in the first century. They were getting along and getting by. They were living in a time where, as a people, they'd been generationally oppressed. They were under Roman military occupation. They'd lost their freedom. They were economically exploited. They were socially persecuted. They were a beaten down people. And, I think it's somewhat analogous to the scene, that goes back to the book of Judges with Gideon, where people were just kind of hiding out, trying to hold on to what little they had. That was the, if you will, the emotional reality of the scene as we find it. The principals, Mary and Joseph. Mary is apparently a young woman. We don't know anything in terms of details about their age or much about them at all, but if she was a woman of marrying age in a household, she would have been serving that kind of household existence, literally survival. That's the number one goal in the ancient world. If there's anything that will help you make sense of the Bible more than maybe that you have presently, is to not read it from the perspective of a 21st century mentality, where for most of us, you can go many parts of the world and find an ancient mentality. You can find survival mentality. You can find it in some of the rougher kind of neighborhoods of LA. But for most of us, we live far from a survival mentality. We live in a satisfaction mentality. We're reaching for satisfaction. And you read from a satisfaction mentality, particularly the Old Testament and the Gospels, and it's all survival based. It's all that people are trying to survive. So you get married and have a family not because you're trying to have this happy, full life, because you're trying to survive. And we know little about Joseph. Church tradition speculates that he was older, but largely because he disappears from the gospel accounts as Jesus grows into adulthood. So because of that, that's the only reason. There's speculation. Was he older? It's possible, but he's getting along, getting by. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, doing the best they can. We don't always do the best we can when we're getting along. Sometimes we do the worst we can. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're doing the best they can. Joseph is a carpenter by trade. He's trying to establish himself enough to have a family, and that's what's going on. Life is happening, life under less than ideal conditions, life that's full of challenges, life that survival is a question. And so into this setting, suddenly comes this initiating encounter with the redemptive purpose of God that is now here and present for them and for the whole world. And with that comes this message, do not be afraid. Let's read from Matthew. We're going to focus on Joseph today. and just learn some things from him. We're going to park our cherry picker truck in the manger and try to learn from Joseph. One of the important themes surrounding the Bible's account of Jesus' birth is carried in the angelic message, "Do not be afraid." From the heavenly announcements to Zechariah and Mary, to the declaration to the shepherds on the hillsides of Bethlehem, to the angel's encouragement of Joseph, this message is both a comfort and a challenge to those who receive it. As a direction for life, it confirms the reality of Jesus being our Emmanuel, God with us, in times that require courage and confidence. This Advent season, we need to hear again the message, "Fear not," as we meet the challenge of daily living and learn from the experience of those who first heard and responded to this call to reject fear. Let's read this account, Matthew 1, 18 to 25. It's there in your notes. This is how Matthew tells the story. This is how the birth of Jesus came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Wow. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, "The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Mary and Joseph are betrothed, right? In the first century kind of custom, that marriage began with an agreement, not just between individuals, but between families. It was an agreement for these two people to form the basis of a new family and extending their families that they come from, and there was a process of time that kind of led up to the establishment of a home and a life together, and so Mary and Joseph are in that journey, that they're betrothed. They're connected by this binding agreement between them and their families. And Mary is discovered. That's an interesting phrase, right? She's discovered to be with child. Apparently she didn't volunteer that information. Obviously for her, what's happening is mind-blowing. That God is going to bring his son into the world through her, that God's Spirit is accomplishing this much in the same way that the Spirit of God accomplished creation. He's going to accomplish our recreation. And so I assume the overwhelmingness of that one day maybe Joseph says, "Mary, you're putting on a little weight." I don't know. What happens? Who finds out? How does the news get out? But when it does, Joseph is confronted with what most of us would be confronted with, and that is, I'm not buying this. I'm not buying this story about God and miraculous conception and all of that. And so he has to process, what am I going to do? And it's into that process that God comes with this message to not be afraid. So back to your notes. From Joseph, we can learn to make hard choices that trust in God's promises and purposes, even when it costs us to fear not, doing right, without reward. It costs us to fear not doing right without reward. We know little about Joseph. One of the most important things we know, Matthew tells us here, that he was a righteous man. And evidence of that righteousness, and I love this about the scripture, that evidence of that righteousness is not cited here in Matthew 1 of his purity of doctrine. It's not cited about how his moral perfection. The evidence of his righteousness is that confronted with an embarrassing, kind of shame-filled event in someone else's life close to him, that Joseph seeks to do the right thing without exposing this other person to the humiliation of their wrong. Let me just run over that ground again. Because I fear that in religiousness, in so much it feels like of the American church, that we want to establish our rightness against the backdrop of the exposure of everyone's wrongness. Like we want everyone to be exposed in their wrongness so that we can be shown to be right. Joseph does something incredibly interesting and costly, that he is seeking a way to do the right thing without exposing her to public humiliation. There's echoes in this of what Noah's sons do, at least the right ones. When Noah gets drunk and is lying naked and two of his sons back in towards him to put a blanket, a covering over him. That there's something right about doing something that you're not going to get rewarded for. Like, I feel like so oftentimes in our desire to do right, we want to leverage it to our advantage.
Wow.
We want to leverage being right, doing right, so it helps us, it serves us in some way. And part of the instruction to Joseph to fear not is to fear not doing the right thing without that anticipation of reward. And quite the opposite, that there is going to be a real cost to doing the right thing. So in this case, following along this track, if Joseph had kept going on this track, it would have been that suddenly he's exposed to the failure of this betrothed covenant of marriage. And if he was older, does he have another shot at this? He's a poor carpenter. There are not families lining up to kind of enter into this agreement with Joseph. Is this, what's on the line? What's the potential cost? It's enormous that somehow he removes himself from this particular agreement without it looking completely like her fault.
Yeah, come on.
Wow. That's pretty courageous, right? Now you and I know that God is watching because we believe God is with us. And Joseph's just finding that out in a big way. That he can trust that God is watching, that in fact, God's no man's debtor, and that righteousness is rewarded, but in the immediate, in the present tense, in the foreseeable future, that there could be big costs to doing what's right. And I think that that's so critical for us. Like, here's our truck parked in the manger scene. You and I, our lives can be just kind of going along, getting along. Yeah, we might have religious hope and expectation, and we might have a background of faith, but by and large, our lives are going along, getting along, and then one day we enter the intersection of God's redemptive purpose for our lives and for the world through us, however big or small that is. And in context of that, this sense that God actually wants to be with us in our life and the direction of our life and the outcome of our life, and that it's required of us to not be afraid, because fear will actually kind of move us off of that path of redemption. We will kind of exit this on-ramp that God wants us to take. I learned this really early on in my Christian life. I didn't grow up in church. I didn't have any faith background at all. And I came to Christ because of the witness of some friends and my own reading of the Bible, and it was the Jesus movement, and there was a lot of people who were becoming Christians, and I was one of them. And at the time I was in university and I was working full-time in a printing company, and I was making pretty good money, and I had a lot of responsibilities. I was running the production side of this place, and it was this growing, thing, and like most small businesses, always on the line for survival. And we went through a pretty, one particularly dry spell, and then this big job came in. And I'll never forget my boss, the owner, who was so excited. This is really going to bail us out. And he, because I was overproduction, he kind of laid it out. And it was a pornographic magazine.
Wow.
That was, kind of this big regular income ticket that would come the way of the business, and there it was, and he said, "You're not excited." Everybody, honestly, in the business, it was the 70s. Everybody was, most of them were cocaine. Everybody was a cocaine addict, and I'd become a Christian, and I was, if the only thing I was really known for in terms of my faith was that I wouldn't do cocaine, and yet here's this. He said, "I can tell you're not excited," but I said, "I gotta think about this. So let's talk in a couple of hours." And I thought about it, and I thought, I'm gonna have to quit. Like, it wasn't like I was, some giant prude and thought, I'd never encountered pornography before. It was just the idea that I couldn't participate in its reproduction, its, broadcast. I couldn't do that of good conscience. And so a couple hours later, I went into his office and said, "I'm going to have to quit." He said, "What do you mean you're going to have to quit?" And I said, this work, it's not work that I can do. I know the company needs it. I know this is salvation financially." And said, I just personally can't do it. And of course, for me, I'm thinking, this is like a really good job. I'm a full-time university student. Where am I going to get another thing like this? It was like, I had to decide, okay, God, you're with me. My boss looked at me and said, "You don't want to do it, we're not doing it."
No way.
Yeah, I said, "You don't want to do it, we're not doing it. We're not losing you over this. We'll see what happens." That business, I'll just give you, one last note on that. That business, we started, he and I, he took over a little print operation in his father's basement as Dad was a police officer, was killed, and he had this little side job of having a little printing press in his basement. His son was in college, and suddenly it fell upon him to take care of his mom and his sister, and he hardly knew anything about printing. And so he called the local high school where I was a student in a graphic arts class.
Wow.
And asked, do you have anybody who knows anything that needs a job? And that was me. That's how so he and I, and over the course of 7 years, now that company is, what happened initially was we started printing fine art, like reproduction of fine art, and then we became one of the few printers in the entire world that prints Hallmark cards.
No way.
Yeah. Wow. And all that took place after the pornographic magazine incident. So there was reward. Just wasn't apparent in the moment. I don't know how you felt about all this exposure that's going on to people who are sexually harassing and exploiting others in entertainment. I referenced Harvey, and politics, and Lord knows it's everywhere, the church. I don't know if you've thought, I actually super welcome this time, because I think it has the potential maybe to produce some change. Wow. I'll never forget a conversation that I had. My mother was the primary breadwinner for our family growing up. My father, when he was present, he often wasn't employed, and my mother went to work. She didn't have huge skills. She didn't have a college degree. She went to work in a secretarial pool in a corporation in the 1950s. And I'll never forget, some of you groaned because but I never forget a conversation I had with her when I was older. about what it was like to be a woman in a secretarial pool in the 1950s in a corporation. And I was so deeply angered at the thought of men preying on the vulnerability of women like my mother. Like that just so deeply angered me. And so what's happening right now, I'm thinking, what would it look like to do the right thing without expectation of reward? Like if you were the guilty one, like what would that look like? You know, because I see all these people who are guilty trying to manage their guilt to preserve some kind of reward, you know, like, right, preserve my job, preserve my reputation, preserve whatever it is, kind of, we like to manage our doing right. We leverage it again, so we come out better. What would it look like to do the right thing without any expectation? You know, it would probably look like where you just copped to it and said, guilty as charged, and open yourself up, kind of in an unguarded way, to whatever civil or criminal action would come at you, and just say, I did it, you know, I did the crime, I'm going to do the time. Like, this is is what it would like to do the right thing without reward. And you think, well, how could anybody do that? Well, if that is your intersection with the redemptive path of God moment, you better take it. You better take it without fear. I'm thinking of someone like Charles Colson, right? One of Nixon's henchmen who was just, I mean, the most cutthroat lawyer, and just, you know, got caught up in the Watergate thing, went to prison. I mean, lost everything, disbarred as a lawyer, you know, just shamed, you know, in terms of the kind of national conversation. In prison, lost his freedom, his money. And what does he do? In prison, it's a redemptive crossroads. And he says, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to remember every person that's there that's kind of alone and unconnected. And I'm going to see if I can somehow mobilize Christians to care, because he comes to Christ. And what happens? He becomes a person of great reputation and respect. And that's God.
Wow.
Like doing the right thing without reward. Those moments when they present themselves, they are like, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do the right thing without reward. Don't be afraid to do the right thing at great cost, because God is with you. And what will come from that will be redemptive. Joseph thinks, I want to do the right thing. I don't want to shame Mary publicly. But even that's not the right thing. The right thing is, don't be afraid to go through with this. Don't be afraid to take her into your home as your wife. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to embrace the questions. And, you know, the question of illegitimacy surrounds Jesus his entire life. Right. We know where we're from. The Pharisees and the Sadducees say, but we don't know where you're from.
Wow.
The question of legitimacy is around Jesus' life, his whole life. That meant it was around Joseph and Mary. And legitimacy in the first century Jewish world was everything. And without it, you're nothing. So to embrace that cloud, don't be afraid. Do the right thing, regardless of the cost. Secondly, from Joseph, we can learn to make hard choices that trust in God's promises and purposes, even when it costs us to fear not missing out on life's other considerations. Joseph considered it. I love that. He's a righteous man, and he considered what are the options. What are life's, what are the directions? And into those considerations comes this message, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to pursue the path of God and leave behind life's other considerations. Don't be afraid to miss out. For most of us, we have some miles on us. And, well, Carl, literally, your odometer is turned over multiple times. Like, the wheels have fallen off, the valves need to be replaced. But we still love you. Carl, the other thing that Carl told me, other than I should have notes, that was the one, his instructions to me. The other thing he told me is don't mention or talk about me being a worship leader. Because, he had a big celebration, which we would have been at and been part of if we were in, we were in the East Coast, but I would have been there because, wow, that's a turning of a page and a new season, and we're just so grateful for all that meant. But I was disappointed when I heard about the evening because Carl hadn't played the harp. And I know he has one because I gave him a harp. He has David's harp, and he didn't play it, and I'm really disappointed. So, okay, all right. Where were we? We're back talking about missing out on life's other considerations. So you're younger, right? How can you not just think about your considerations, life's considerations? Like, what would life be like this direction? What, if you're unmarried, what would life be like, finding this person? Or, there's all these considerations, right, of life and its alternatives. And then there's the will of God.
Wow.
Right? And here's, friends, I speak to you as a friend. The essential reality of faith is what Joseph does here. The essential reality of faith is not the acceptance of a body of truth. The essential reality of faith is not simply conforming your behavior, your morality, your lifestyle to a Christian form. The essential element of faith is that you choose to follow Jesus against following yourself. That is it. Like, this is my way for you, and these are all your other considerations. And somehow, it's hard to choose His way over all your other possibilities, especially when you got lots of them. Like the more you have, God bless you. I always think, I just feel for people that just, like a dump truck is backed up and, maybe they get fame and wealth and all sorts of things at a young age, and there's just no door really that they couldn't open. And I just think, gosh, how hard is that to choose the one right door when every door will open to you? How hard to choose the one door? But that's the choice we have. And in making that choice, you think, well, I did it. I chose to follow Jesus. I went forward. I got prayer. For me, coming from a non-religious background, what happened was I was reading the Bible and I'm reading Isaiah 53 and I'm thinking, who is this person who's despised and forsaken of men? And I feel an arrow go through my heart, kind of reading that text, that, basically the arrow said, Jesus is the one despised and forsaken, and you're the one despising and forsaking.
Wow.
And it was truly a revelatory kind of spiritual experience, and I prayed my first ever prayer, God, if you're up there, I really want to know, and if this has something to do with Jesus, I want to figure that out. And I didn't think anything could possibly ever happen from praying, talking to myself, by myself, and I stood up, and that arrow that went through my heart caused my young life full of rage and hurt to begin spilling out of my shoes.
Wow.
And I thought, oh no, it's true.
Wow.
God is real, and He has something important to do with Jesus, and that choice. Okay, I did that once, right? But then it just keeps coming up, right?
Wow.
Life's other considerations. I'm in the midst of one now. Like, I got a death sentence over my life with a cancer diagnosis that they look at me and say, wow, a year, 3 years, and think, wow, what do I do with the time? But my bucket list. Forget bucket lists.
Yeah, come on.
It's cultural pornography, bucket lists. It's materialistic fantasies. It's like, what do you do with whatever amount of life you have? You have the fundamental Joseph choice. Do not be afraid to miss out on life's other considerations by choosing to do the will of God and following Jesus with your life. Whatever that means, whatever the outcome of it, do that. And like, so what do I do with the time I've got? I come here to be with you and Carl and whatever. Or, last weekend I was in Tehachapi. It's like an enormous privilege that I have to share anything that God has given me with whatever time I have left. I'm not going to miss out seeing, the Taj Mahal. I'm not going to miss out, making out with Nancy on the top of the Eiffel Tower. I'm not going to miss out, having the best meal ever at the French Laundry. I'm not going to miss out by doing Jesus stuff with Jesus.
Hallelujah.
Because that's the life that He has for me. You're not going to miss out. Like, the famous conversation the disciples had, like, hey, what about us? We're going to miss out. We gave up jobs and lands and stuff, families and stuff, and we're missing out. And Jesus said, you're not going to miss out. It's going to come to you in a multiple of 100 in this life and in the glory to come, and you can't be afraid.
Amen.
So many people wander away from Jesus because they're afraid of missing out on life's other considerations. Right? Like, oh, I don't want to miss this. And God bless Joseph. Whatever we know about him, we know he was willing to do right without reward. We know that he was willing to miss out on life's other considerations. Second, third, we're done. From Joseph, we can learn to make hard choices that trust in God's promise and purpose, even when it costs us to fear not finding God in the mess. Finding God in the mess. I don't know if it was that Campus Crusade pitch, God has a wonderful plan for your life, and if you'll just accept it, all things will be wonderful. I don't know. That's a misstatement of the four spiritual laws, but it felt like that. It feels like that sometimes when people talk about the gospel. Just accept Jesus and your whole life's going to get fixed up. The truth is, just accept and follow Jesus, and He's going to start fixing you up from the inside out. And the outside's pretty much going to still be a mess for a while. Maybe through all of this life. And maybe it becomes a greater mess because you've decided to follow Jesus. So Joseph, he's in a mess either way, right? It's all a mess. Like he's a carpenter in the first century. He's working to survive. He's working hard to have enough to have a family. And if you ever get sick or you ever get injured, it's not like there's anything to fall back on. It's brutal loss. And so he's doing the best he can. And now, this thing with Mary, if he divorces her quietly, then now he's back to square one, and how long, maybe his hope for family, his hope for that kind of future, for that kind of surviving, maybe it's gone, and then God comes and says, don't be afraid. And now, does that mean, wow, this is going to be a great future now? Well, yeah, because God's going to be in it.
Wow.
And He's going to do amazing things.
Yeah.
But your life is going to be a mess in a way that, what happens? So they marry, they culminate the betrothal process, but they don't have relations until the baby is born. The baby's born, and the most powerful kind of wicked person in the community wants to kill the child. So they're hunted. They live kind of with a scepter of fear. Whenever God tells you don't be afraid, yeah, Uh-oh. That means I'm going to have to live with courage and confidence in the face of fearful things. And then, if that's not, so it's so bad, this kind of pursuit of the death of the child and them, no doubt, that they flee as refugees to Egypt. Now, can I just tell you, again, give you a little Bible background, that if being a carpenter in Roman-occupied Israel in the first century was a hand-to-mouth survival kind of operation, being a refugee carpenter in Egypt was 10 times worse. They fled to Egypt. They're there for several years and then they return and life's perfect, right? No? Then they have the mess of raising a family and doing all of that, and this amazing kid growing up and scaring the heck out of them, and then he becomes an adult. And it seems like the whole world either adores him or despises him. And then the most powerful people in the land want to kill him, just like they did before. That's a mess of a lot. You got to watch him die. It's a mess. But God was in the mess. God was in the mess in such a way that, in retrospect, would Joseph or Mary have ever said they would have done anything other than choose to not be afraid and have courage and confidence that God was at work in their mess? No, they couldn't have done anything different. God is at work in our mess. I get to have lots of conversations now these days with people who have cancer. Last Sunday, there were just several really touching ones. And sometimes people want to offer you their latest cure because they found it and God bless them. But other times people are staring in the void. And they know that there's not a lot of time, and what do I do? And I said, first of all, you've got to know, you've got to understand, you've got to find that God is with you right now. Not just to show up to heal you, but He's right now in the midst of your suffering. When you go through that treatment and your body just wants to scream out that, it's hurting and betraying you, and God is there. He knows all these things. He is with us in these things. He leads us through them and beyond them and triumphs over them. But He's in the mess. Don't expect it somehow to not be messy. Some of us, as we get older, we want it to be less messy, don't we? I think people do. I think that's part of what happens is I dealt with the mess my whole life. I did the best I could. I did my job. I hung in there with 3 marriages. I hung in there and or whatever it is, all the relational trauma and difficulty and challenge and now I just want a nice place by the golf course and watch Oprah. Maybe that's not God for you.
Wow.
Maybe there's yet another answer to be given to, will you go this way with me even though it's messy? Even though it's messy. And the outcome, of course, is glorious. The outcome is an adventure beyond anything that we could expect, like that I choose to follow Jesus and what He's doing in my life and wants to do through my life. And I'm not talking about everybody becoming a missionary or everybody doing this or that, but just doing what Jesus has for you to do in your life day by day, where you work. I got to finish, but let me go back to that printing company and my friend Tim, who owned the company and used massive amounts of cocaine and who we became like brothers, right? And I helped him grow this thing, and he had respect for me, and we loved each other. And then I, finished university, and I said, I'm going to go off and study theology. I went to a place called Regent College in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I did my master's degree in theology, and that was to be a stepping stone. I was going to do my PhD in New Testament studies, and he knew that. But when it came down to it, of hey, I'm going to do this now, and he begged me not to. And at the time, now the business is, millions and millions. I'll give you a third of the business. Stay with me. I can't do it. I said. Interesting about following Jesus that sometimes life's alternatives they involve a lot more money. Like, it's really interesting. But I know. And I'd always tried to share my faith with him, so much so that he just got sick and he said, I don't want to hear from you anymore. I know that you believe in Jesus and all that, but just stop talking about it. Which I thought, okay. And I'm just going to, I love you, you're my friend. I don't want to make you feel whatever. So I went off and studied theology, and every time I came back, because Kansas City is my hometown, and I would go and see my friend Tim, and his life just got increasingly interesting as the business was, made him wealthier and wealthier for a season when Jacques Cousteau, remember Jacques Cousteau was still alive, that my friend traveled with him almost full time, was on all those adventures in the Amazon and all this stuff. And so he's this printing everything for the Cousteau Society and all this stuff, and so I'm in his office, and he's got like shrunken heads from the Amazon on his office, and he's got all these things. He's telling me about his travels with Jacques Cousteau, and we're just catching up. And so I'm sitting in this office, and we're across from me. He's behind his desk, and I'm in one of his chairs, and we're just catching up. And all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit comes into the scene.
Wow.
Now, I don't always experience that with any kind of drama, but sometimes I call it like the whoosh effect. It's like the Spirit is always present, but sometimes it's like whoosh, like He's really present. And that sometimes for me, might happen in worship or in a particularly anointed time, or who knows, but never in my friend's office. And so whoosh, and I'm thinking in my mind, Lord, what are you doing here? Like, why have you shown up here? Like, it's a mystery. And my friend knows something has happened because he's looking at the air conditioning ducts like something has gone wrong with the atmosphere of the room, and he's looking at the air conditioning ducts, and I feel the Lord tell him about me. And I thought, I have. So many times He asked me not to anymore. No, tell him about me. He's like wondering what's going on. I look at him and say, Tim, we're talking about Jacques Cousteau and shrunken heads. Tim, this is what Jesus is like. And I start not witnessing to him, I just start telling him about Jesus that I've come to know, And as this is going on, I'm thinking, I wish I had a tape recorder, because this is like really good, and I'm not going to remember this. Like this is like flowing out so, such a lovely, orderly way. And so I go on for, 5, 10, 15 minutes, I'm telling him about Jesus. He's just staring at me, not stopping me. So I'm just rolling with it. And then all of a sudden, just as it started with that sense of telling him about me, I hear the Lord say, you can stop now. And so I just threw on the brakes mid-sentence. I just, a bit awkward, embarrassed, looking at each other. I just stopped. We're staring at each other. And tears start forming in my friend's eyes and down his face. And he says, David, what's happening right now? He said, this morning, one of my employees, their mother died, and out of respect, I went to her. It was a Catholic service. I went to name the church, and this particular church has a huge stained glass window in the front with Jesus ascending. It's the ascension, Jesus ascending into the clouds with angels. He says, I'm sitting in the very back of the church. I'm not paying attention to anything that's happening. I'm just there to show my respect. And And I looked up at the stained glass and the face of Jesus, and I thought to myself, Jesus, if you're like really out there, I have these questions about you.
Wow.
He said, and I gave voice to them under my breath, 5 questions. And you've walked into my office. We haven't seen each other in years. You've come into my office and you've answered the 5 questions in the order that I asked them. You know? And said, what's happening? I said, well, it's not me, number one. I said, what's happening is that Jesus is trying to let you know who he really is, and that he's trying to extend this invitation to you to know him and follow him. Not religion, all the things you hate about your background or the hypocrisy of others. It's Jesus. He wants to know you, and he wants you to follow him. And my friend gave his life to the Lord that day.
Wow.
And sometimes that way is like in this conversation. It's not just about the huge turns of our life. It's sometimes about the small actions of our life where we're just trying to be the good news as well as share the good news. Mm-hmm. Would you stand up with me? We're going to pray together to finish, and I have a particular way I want us to pray. Some of you will know that maybe yet again, maybe for the first time, you're at that crossroads, and God is addressing your heart and saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do the right thing. Don't be afraid to miss out on some options. Don't be afraid to embrace the uncertainty, the mess maybe that choosing to have God with you and you with God will bring. If that's relevant to you, if that issue of not being afraid is timely in your life, we're just going to bow our heads together. Would you put your hand up with me, though, so I'll know if that issue of not being afraid is like a relevant thing for you and for making your choices and deciding like what role is God going to have in all of this. Father, we reach for you. We reach for you today. You're near to every one of us to find you, to follow you. You're near to us. Lord, I just pray for my friends today. I pray, God, in the choices that they're making, in the redemptive plan that is unfolding for them and through them, that, God, we could choose you. We could choose to embrace what's right. We could choose to embrace, Lord, your will and the mess of it, and we could, Lord, do that and not be afraid. And help us, God. If there's anyone who knows how to live in a broken world with confidence and courage, it's you, Jesus. We want to learn from you. We want to gain from you. Come, Lord, today, in this place, this time, for this moment and its ramifications for where we're headed. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, you call pure gold. Pure gold. If I have any wish for you, it would be that you would, as soon as we post this, that you'd listen to it again and again and again, because there are many, many, many things that he's shared that were very true and relevant. And the overall thing that you should think about this week is finding Jesus in the mess, finding God in the mess. Just good stuff. We're going to have to end and get out of here so they can come in here. But feel free to exit, hang, talk, and meet David and Nancy and Kathy and Bill. And anyway, just a blessing to have David here. We will have him here as often as we can because I think he's a good friend, and he brings a great gift to us. And so God bless you, and we'll see you next Sunday. And we'll see him before that. We see him this Thursday, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Why would I ask him? Doesn't even know what day it is. All right. Bless you, bless you, bless you, and get out.